by increasing that investment to over £500 million. So why did Labour still walk away, handing jobs and investment to our competitors?
The honourable gentleman says that they secured a deal. Well, the deal was announced in March. The general election was in July. Where was the deal? Where was the funding for it? Where was the written agreement? There was nothing.
Mr. Speaker, when Labour negotiates, Britain loses. AstraZeneca are investing over £4 billion in Singapore, the US and Canada. They could have invested in our country too. What is Labour doing now to bring back the deal they destroyed?
There was a deal by WhatsApp that was never followed up by the Treasury, never followed up by ministers, no meetings between AstraZeneca and their government. Their government lets Britain down every time, which is why the country turned to Labour, and Labour is delivering.
Mr. Speaker, the Payment Systems Regulator found that more than half of bank transfer scams recorded in 2023 originated on Facebook, Instagram or WhatsApp. What progress has the Secretary of State made in making sure that tech companies are held to account for fraud originating on their platforms?
He makes a very good point. It's one of the things that we specifically need to look at later when we move forward with the data bill in committee. Perhaps he'll be sitting on the bill committee. Who knows?
David Reid. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has just held talks for a UK-EU defence and security partnership, of which the development of artificial intelligence will have been a key theme. However, last night the UK chose not to join with EU countries in signing the international agreement on AI. So can the Secretary of State please explain this dissonance in the government's approach?
At the Paris summit, let me congratulate firstly President Macron for laying on an incredible summit that brought together governments, tech companies and investors, and Britain's voice was heard loud and clear, which is why we're delivering such extraordinary investment into this country. Most of the aspects that were negotiated, the Labour government signed up to and was fully engaged in. In a few areas, we will put Britain's interest first, and a couple of other countries didn't sign too. I don't hear him criticising them.
Just Athwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Ilford, we worked with Queen Mary University to launch a new satellite campus in Ilford to teach medicine and dentistry. Given the growing importance of education in STEM fields, what specific steps is the Secretary of State taking to increase educational opportunities in this area and in London and across the country?
I'm grateful for his question. The government is working to develop a world-leading science and technology skills base that will drive economic growth and opportunity for all. We're committed to expanding the access and participation in science and technology education, and we're partnering with universities to build the skills and workforce across the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A month ago, the Prime Minister said that countries will either be AI makers or AI takers. Does the Minister agree that, given that the Prime Minister didn't attend the AI Safety Summit, but he's given a clear indication that the UK will be an AI taker?
This Prime Minister has delivered the AI Opportunities Action Plan. This Prime Minister is deploying AI technology and productivity tools across government itself. This Prime Minister has brought in £30 billion in investment into digital AI infrastructure since he became Prime Minister. And at the same time, this Prime Minister is sorting out the mess left after 14 years of Tory rule.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Imran Hussain.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we progressed our Borders Bill to deliver counter-terrorism-style powers to bring vile criminal smuggling gangs to justice. We also announced a further £350 million to get Britain building and deliver 1.5 million new homes our country desperately needs, including more affordable homes. We've slashed red tape that holds businesses and working people back, creating 10,000 more apprentices. This morning I have meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was proud to have played my part in helping draft what has now become the Employment Rights Bill. A new poll shows 3/4 of the British public back the stronger rights for workers in the bill, including better sick pay. Yet that lot over there, the Tories and Reform, disgracefully voted against it. In fact, the leader of the opposition doesn't even believe in maternity pay or the living wage. Mr. Speaker, our statutory sick pay is ranked one of the lowest in Europe. It needs to be brought in line with the living wage. So will the Prime Minister back my campaign to strengthen this bill further so sick pay is at the level that finally stops punishing workers for being sick?
Mr. Speaker, our plan for change delivers the biggest upgrade in workers' rights in a generation to our employment rights bill. Ending exploitative zero-hour contracts, ending the scandal of fire and rehire, extending statutory sick pay to 1.3 million employees. Of course, that's on top of the pay rise for 3 million of the lowest paid. I would have thought the Leader of the Opposition might actually sort of support day one protection employment rights, given where she's going, but she thinks maternity leave is excessive. Our plan is pro-worker and pro-growth.
Yeah. Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Beno.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government established the Ukraine Family Scheme, and in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children and the elderly, have found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand. Is the government planning to appeal on any points of law? And if so, which ones?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision. She hasn't quite done her homework because the decision in question was taken under the last government, according to the legal framework of the last government. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. It should be Parliament that makes the rules on immigration. It should be the government that makes the policy. That is the principle, and the Home Secretary is already looking at the legal loophole which we need to close in this particular case.
Mr. Speaker, he did not answer the question. If he plans to appeal, then the appeal may be unsuccessful and the law will need to be changed. And if he does not appeal, the law definitely will need to be changed. He talks about a decision made under the last government. It was not made by the last government, it was made by the courts. The issue we are discussing today is about judicial decisions. We cannot be in a situation where we allow enormous numbers of people to exploit our laws in this way. There are millions of people all around the world in terrible situations. We cannot help them all, and we certainly cannot bring them all here. Will he commit to bringing forward that new legislation or amending his borders bill?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already said the Home Secretary has already got her team working on closing this loophole. We don't need to wait for that. We're getting on with that because we're taking control. They lost control of immigration. We had nearly 1 million people come into this country, had an open borders experiment. On a Monday of this week, they voted against increased powers to deal with those that are running the vile trade of people smuggling. Same old Tories, open borders, empty promises.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister was on top of his brief, perhaps he'd be able to answer some questions. Given this crazy decision and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8. I'm not talking about what he just said. I know Labour MPs don't understand much of what they're saying, but the Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a situation where we need to put our national interest before the ECHR. Does he agree that we should legislate even if lawyers warn that this might be incompatible with human rights law.
Prime Minister.
She complains about scripted answers and questions. Her script doesn't allow her to listen to the answer.
Prime Minister.
She asked me if we're going to change the law and close the loophole in question 1. I said yes. She asked me again in question 2, and I said yes. She asked me again in question 3. It's still yes.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't listen to question 1. I asked if he would appeal the decision. He did not answer that. He's not listening. He's too busy defending the international human rights law framework. Mr. Speaker, this case has arisen because a Palestinian came to the UK from Gaza in 2007. He is now a British citizen. This is precisely why we need to break the conveyor belt from arriving in the UK to acquiring indefinite leave to remain, and then a British passport, and now a right to bring 6 family members here as well. Just last week, the Prime Minister bizarrely claimed that a British passport was not a pull factor for those coming to the UK. Will he now support our plans to toughen the process on indefinite leave to remain and make getting a British passport a privilege, not a right?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, they presided over record high levels of immigration. Reached nearly 1 million. It was a one-nation experiment in open borders. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one campaigning for more people to come and thanking her own side when they supported her campaign. So before she lectures us, I think she needs to reflect on her own record here.
Mr. Speaker, he is the Prime Minister now. The people out there want to know what he is going to do about the situation. He needs to spend less time whining about the last government and do his job. I thought, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister and I both agreed that Israel had a right to defend herself. Yet the judge in this case noted that the family were facing a humanitarian crisis, and I quote, as a consequence of the Israeli government's indiscriminate attempts to eliminate Hamas, and government lawyers accepted this. Is the Prime Minister allowing lawyers to change the position on Israel? And was this because of advice from the Attorney General? And if not, why on earth did government lawyers accept the argument that Israeli actions were indiscriminate?
Prime Minister.
They put the complete opposite argument. She talks about on top of her breath. She has no idea what she's talking about. I'll tell her again. We need to change the law. That's why the Home Secretary is already closing the gap. I know the script doesn't allow any adaptation, but this is getting tedious.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has not read the judgment. I suggest that he does. There are very serious questions now. Being asked about the Attorney General, the Prime Minister's personal friend and donor. Even Labour ministers are concerned. One Labour peer, Lord Glassman, has called him the absolute archetype of an arrogant progressive fool. If we are serious about protecting our borders, we need to make sure we appoint people who believe in our country and everything we stand for. It is not clear the Attorney General does. The government is now recruiting a new Chief Inspector of Borders who lives in Finland and wants to work from home. This is not serious. Why should the British public put up with this?
Prime Minister.
The individual in question was appointed in 2019 by the last government to a senior position. He then worked for 5 years from Finland. We've changed that, and he's now going to be working from the United Kingdom full-time. Finland under them. And she talks about the Attorney General. She sat round the cabinet table with an attorney who was later sacked for breaching national security.
Charlotte Littles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Long-standing traders in the CPS Centre in Colchith were devastated to receive eviction notices, giving them just 28 days to vacate, entirely out of the blue and under spurious pretexts by the new owner, shell company Shivat Hananim Capital. So far, the owner and their legal representatives have failed to hear tenants' concerns and mine and to negotiate a way forward. So does the Prime Minister share my concerns at this situation, And will he set out our plans to protect independent businesses, which are at the heart of our high street and communities?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Well, thank her for raising this, which is obviously of real concern to businesses in her constituency. We do, Mr Speaker, expect landlords to meet their obligations to make buildings safe, and we support robust enforcement action from the regulators if they fail to do so. I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the Minister to discuss what steps can be taken in the particular case to support the businesses that her constituents rely on.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 80 years ago this week, the Allies began a pincer movement against German forces between the Ruhr and the Rhine. British and Canadian troops attacked from the north, Americans from the south. British, Canadian and American soldiers fighting shoulder to defeat fascists. 80 years on, President Trump seems to have forgotten all this. His tariffs against steel and aluminium will hit Canada the hardest and will also hit jobs and the cost of living in our country. So in reminding President Trump who America's true and long-standing friends and allies really are, will the Prime Minister also prepare a plan for tariffs in return, starting with tariffs on American electric cars?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, he's right to reference our history, the 80-year anniversary. And of course, we were fighting alongside the Americans, and that is amongst the reasons we have a special relationship. British steel is an essential part of our heartlands, and we will not abandon our skilled workforce. And it needs a level-headed assessment of the implications, which is what we're going through at the moment. But we will always put our national interest first and steelworkers first.
Sir Ed Davey.
Thank the Prime Minister for that reply. But it seems to me the way President Trump and his ally Musk are operating, they do need to hear strong measures and words from even their allies. And moving on to Ukraine, Mr Speaker, if Ukraine is forced to surrender its own sovereign territory to Russia, it will be the greatest betrayal of a European ally since Poland in 1945. But President Trump says Ukraine may end up Russian, and he wants American money back. I think we all fear where this could end and the dangerous implications for our defence and our security. So can the Prime Minister reassure this House that he and other European leaders have given sufficient support to President Zelensky so that he can't be bullied by Trump and Putin into accepting a deal that will effectively hand victory to Russia?
Prime Minister.
As he knows, I met President Zelensky in Kyiv just a few weeks ago at my 8th meeting. The position since the outbreak of this conflict has been a united position across the House of supporting Ukraine, and I was able to reiterate my position, which is we must put Ukraine in the strongest possible position. That matters now just as much as it mattered at the beginning of this conflict, the strongest possible position, and I did discuss with him what more we can do, what more our allies can do to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position.
Kim Leadbeat.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 2 years ago, from the benches opposite, I published my Healthy Britain report, recommending a cross-departmental approach to improving health and wellbeing. Now that we're in government, I'm delighted that ministers have hit the ground running, because running is obviously very healthy for you. So will the Prime Minister confirm that last week's announcement of an increase to the public health grants, which will help local services focus more on prevention and early intervention, is just the start of a long-term strategy that will make Britain healthier, happier and more productive, reduce pressure on the NHS and promote growth?
Well, I thank her for highlighting the important role that local communities play in supporting healthy lifestyles. I'm delighted, Mr Speaker, we're providing almost £4 billion for the local health services that people rely on, and that's things like health visitors, stop smoking services and drug abuse treatments. I'll make sure that she meets the relevant minister to discuss.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Prime Minister, I get it. Nobody wants to get into a trade war. But, you know, unlike Peter Mandelson, sometimes you've got to stand up for what you believe in. My friends here in the DUP have learnt nothing from their mistake of backing Brexit and think that tariffs are a laughing matter. But would you agree with me that actually we need to stand up for ourselves, we need to back our workers, we need to back our businesses, not just in Lagan Valley, but indeed across the UK?
Well, yes, of course. The US and the UK share a strong and balanced trading relationship. We invest hugely in each other's economies, and we will continue to work closely with President Trump to boost growth and to create jobs. And I reassure her we will always act in the best interests of businesses and working people across the whole of the United Kingdom, including, of course, Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was baffled on Monday that, given the chance to support legislation backed by the National Crime Agency to crack down on criminal smuggler gangs and secure our borders, the parties opposite, the Conservatives and Reform, linked arms in the voting lobby to vote against it. The Conservatives spent 3 years and £700 million on their ludicrous Rwanda scheme and saw 4 volunteers returned. Does the Prime Minister agree with me? There is only one party that is serious about repairing our broken immigration system.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and let me remind them what they voted against earlier this week in our Borders Bill. They voted against, that's Reform and the Tories, they voted against making it an offence to organise the buying, selling and transport of small boats, against making it an offence to endanger lives at sea, against and powers to arrest suspected people smugglers before the smuggling takes place. They voted against. They voted for open borders, both of them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister gave yet another threadbare excuse for why he and his North London lawyer friends are giving away the Chagos Islands. Mr. Speaker, this is his decision, and he must own it. More importantly, he can't tell us, the British taxpayer, how much this is going to cost. Is it £9 billion? Is it £18 billion? Is it £52 billion? The Times have called this botched deal insane. Members of his own cabinet reportedly think it's impossible to understand. And one of his own MPs think it's the worst thing the Labour Party have ever done. So could the Prime Minister tell us which word he thinks best describes this deal?
Mr. Speaker, I set out the position in relation to the Chagos Islands last week. I also offered the Leader of the Opposition a briefing on this, a high-level briefing. She still hasn't taken me up on that briefing. They're asking questions without wanting to know the facts. It's extraordinary. Mr. Speaker, someone who wants to be Prime Minister does not want to know the facts, even when she's offered a high-level briefing. He'd be better informed if she took me up on the offer of a briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will, I'm sure, want to congratulate Newcastle United on reaching the League Cup final after Arsenal's exit. But will he also, in what is National Apprentice Week, will he also congratulate the 600 apprentices learning trades from welding to quantity surveying as part of the Tyne Bridge restoration programme? And whilst I know he can't confirm bridging the funding gap left by the Tories, will he confirm that he is looking forward to seeing the Tyne Bridge restored in time for its 100th birthday in 2028?
Well, look, I'm going to struggle to sound delighted with the results of that particular football match, but look, it will be a special day for Newcastle fans. But the Tyne Bridge is an iconic North East landmark, and I congratulate the apprentices who are helping to restore this vital piece of infrastructure. As usual, the Tories made empty promises that they had no intention of keeping, including £2.9 billion worth of transport commitments that were never funded. We will look at the capital projects around the spending review and let her know as soon as we can.
Liz Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents, Peter and Maureen, have been married for 70 years. Peter is 93, and for the past few weeks he has been stuck on a hospital ward, waiting to go home because a care package hasn't been arranged. Peter is missing home and missing Maureen. So will the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that the social care crisis will be tackled this year?
Well, can I thank her for raising this issue and the particular case of her constituents? And I also need to know this is deeply personal to her, and if I may, I extend my deepest sympathies to her and her family for their loss. We have taken immediate action on social care, already delivered £3.7 billion of additional investment, working on the first ever fair pay agreement for the sector and, of course, boosting the carers allowance. I invite her and everybody to work with the House on the longer-term reform that we need. Thank you.
Julie Mims.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. James Rennie is an outstanding specialist school in the heart of my Carlisle constituency. Having converted every spare corner into classrooms, exceeded its published admissions numbers, and already having 43 applications known for this September, it is literally bursting at the seams. It cannot expand any further, and what is clearly needed is a new specialist school for North Cumbria. What assurances can the Prime Minister give my constituents that his government will put children before ideology and allow local authorities to tackle the shortage in SEND provision?
Well, I thank you for raising this vital issue. It's not the first time it's come up. We are supporting mainstream schools to increase SEND expertise whilst also establishing dedicated SEND units. Because we need to make sure that special schools also can cater for those with the most complex needs. So we're working on this. It's come up time and again, but we are doing that vital initial steps.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dorothy House is an amazing hospice that supports terminally ill people in Frumen East Somerset and their families, including my good friend Lisa. Next year, Dorothy House will be looking forward to celebrating 50 years of service, but they will also be facing an additional cost of £422,000 thanks to increases in employers' national insurance. Will the Prime Minister commit to meeting with me and representatives of the hospice sector to hear first-hand the impact of NICs and to work with them to find a solution?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, everyone deserves high quality and compassionate end-of-life care. The honourable member knows we inherited a £22 billion black hole in our public finances. That's why we took the difficult but right decisions to invest in our public services. I do recognise the pressure that hospices are facing, and that's why we invested £100 million into hospitals, with an additional £26 million to support children and young people's hospices. And I will make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
John Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A significant part of the dreadful legacy left by the previous Conservative government is a chronic underfunding of transport infrastructure, especially in the North East, as we've just heard from my honourable friend. So does the Prime Minister agree with me and the North East Mayor Kim McGuinness that redevelopment of the Leam sideline, the disused Leam sideline, that would reconnect Gateshead with Durham North, and increasing the capacity on the East Coast Main Line would help bring the metro to Washington in my constituency, and would bring much needed jobs, growth and opportunities to my region?
Well, I thank her, and both she and the North East Mayor are dedicated campaigners on this issue. The party opposite left us a host of unfunded promises, and public transport is in dire condition. Expanding the metro network has huge potential to drive growth and unlock new housing. I'm pleased that progress is being made on the business case.
Second Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, we learned that the Prime Minister's close friend, the Attorney General, has in the past advised Caribbean nations on seeking trillions of pounds in reparations. He's been a key player in the surrender of the Chagos Islands and the related fiasco there, which will cost the taxpayers up to £18 billion, and has even advised Jerry Adams, who is standing in line to get compensation from the British government in Northern Ireland legacy payments, the quantum of which could cost up to £2.7 billion. Given the Attorney General's track record, does the Prime Minister have faith in his motives, and does he have confidence that his best friend represents good value for the British taxpayer?
Mr. Speaker, we've long had the principle that everybody's entitled to legal representation in this country. That means that lawyers don't necessarily agree with their client. Now, the Conservative Party used to believe in that principle. If they now disagree with that principle, they should go and see the victims of very serious crime, including sexual crime, and tell them that under their provisions, the lawyer who disagreed with the perpetrator wouldn't be able to represent them, meaning that victims will be cross-examined by perpetrators because lawyers disagree with the perpetrator. That's never been the Conservative Party position. If it is now, they should say so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allergy School, launched just this week by the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation, is a free programme to support children with food allergies. Allergic disease is a growing issue in this country, with over 20 million people in the UK being affected. For this reason, it has never been more important for us to have a national allergy strategy and an allergy czar to drive and coordinate that action. Will the Prime Minister join me in welcoming this programme, and will he meet with me and the Foundation to talk about how we can work together to drive this issue forward?
Well, I thank you for raising this really important issue, because hospital admissions for allergies have risen sharply, particularly in the last 2 decades. I do welcome the work being carried out by the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation. We will respond to the recommendations of the National Allergy Strategy Group in due course, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My Oxfordshire constituency of Didcot and Wantage has seen a 35% population increase in the last 20 years. My constituents recognise the need for affordable housing, but the current planning system isn't delivering the GP surgeries, dentists and transport options that they need. Will the Prime Minister restore faith in the planning system and, as well as focusing on housing numbers, deliver the local targets for health services and wider infrastructure that growing communities need?
Well, thank you for his question. We are, of course, delivering the 1.5 million homes, but we're creating communities as well for the future, and so he's right that that must include good schools, GPs and reliable transport links. That's what makes a good community. And just today, Mr. Speaker, we announced an additional £350 million to deliver more affordable homes so more people can realise the dream of home ownership.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week is National Apprenticeship Week. As co-chair of the APPG for Apprenticeship, I can tell the Prime Minister that employers are very pleased to see the announcements this week that will make a real difference both in terms of the completion rate and the flexibility around apprenticeships. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that schools should be promoting apprenticeship alongside A-levels and other options? And can he tell us what more he's going to do to support more young people to get into an apprenticeship?
I'm very pleased that he's raised this issue and that we'll be able to give employers more flexibility over maths and English requirements. This is really important, Mr. Speaker. There are very many young people who didn't get the maths qualification they wanted at the time, but are very well suited for the future, want to play their part, and now they can get apprenticeships under the changes that we've made. And that's 10,000 extra apprenticeships. This is delivering for them, giving them a chance for the future to contributing, of course, to our economy.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Farming Minister told a conference of farmers that farming is not high in the pecking order for this government. Given the heartless family farm tax, is his minister correct? Yes or no?
Farming's top of the agenda as far as I'm concerned. That's why we put £5 billion to support farmers in the budget. They failed to spend £300 million on their watch on farming, and we set out our roadmap, which has been welcomed by the NFU, as she very well knows. It was described as long overdue. I wonder who didn't do it before.
Mr. Jewess, I'm sure you don't want to be leaving today. It's not the best day. Right. Natasha Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a graduate of the Croydon Youth Philharmonic Orchestra, the Prime Minister will know that youth services can broaden a young person's horizons beyond what they could ever imagine. But with national spending on youth services seeing a 73% decline since 2010, can the Prime Minister outline how this government will bring youth services back into our communities? Will he look at giving them the statutory protections they deserve? And will he visit Croydon East to see firsthand the vital role these services play in my constituency?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my days in the Croydon Youth Philharmonic Orchestra were a long time ago now. But we do fully recognise the importance of youth services to help young people save lives and live safe and healthy lives. We've been developing our plans for the new National Youth Strategy to bring power back to young people and help every young person realise their potential.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Every 22 minutes, a child in this country loses a parent or a loved one. That's 40,000 children every year facing a trauma which many of us here know can last a lifetime. Charities such as Winston's Wish do a fantastic job of providing support for young people, particularly when schools are closed or there's no one else to turn to. But at the moment, there's no simple way of the children knowing where the charities are or the charities being able to contact the children. So will the government back my private member's bill this summer to do just that? And would the Prime Minister meet me to discuss how we make sure that another generation of children does not have to face this trauma?
Well, can I thank her for her ongoing work and campaign on this important issue. The Cross-Government Bereavement Group continues to look at how we can improve access to the support that children and young people need at these difficult times. And of course, I'll make sure that she gets the meeting that she wants with the Minister to discuss this further.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday marks the 20th anniversary of the launch of the Make Poverty History campaign, and a fantastic speech for all of us that were there, delivered by the late, great Mandiba. That campaign inspired a generation of campaigners and a great Labour government to deliver unprecedented action to tackle global poverty, lifting millions out of poverty. Will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to some of those campaigners and commit to doing all he can to ensure that Britain is playing its full part in helping eradicate global poverty today?
It's a really important issue. We do pay tribute, and of course we continue to play our full part.
Alex Bloor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Basingstoke Hospital, used by half of my constituency of North East Hampshire, has had its rebuild delayed by 15 years, despite no ministerial visit to see the worsening conditions there. The cost of maintaining the hospital for those 15 years is estimated to be almost as much as the rebuild itself. So can the Prime Minister explain the logic of making taxpayers pay twice?
Mr. Speaker, her constituents are right to be frustrated about the empty, unfunded promises that were left behind by the Conservatives, a point made by her and, of course, by the Labour MP for Basingstoke. Under the previous government's plan, a new hospital in Basingstoke would simply not have been delivered because it was unfunded. It was a promise without anything behind it. We've put in place a funded deliverable plan which will see the hospital built, and we'll work closely with the Trust to ensure that it is.
Dr Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's devolution plans are a welcome progressive development to shift power and resources from Whitehall to our communities. But there are, of course, discussions now around the process and realisation of benefits for our communities. So can the Prime Minister assure my residents in Worthing West, and indeed all constituencies starting priority devolution programmes, that Sussex devolution will give us meaningful control over our local priorities, including housing, transport and social care?
Minister.
Well, I thank her for raising devolution, which will see her constituents in Sussex get meaningful control over local priorities. The devolution priority programme, Mr. Speaker, will see a wave of mayors elected next year, including in Sussex, and I believe that those with skin in the game make the best decisions about their communities.
Final question, Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be well aware of the Global Vaccination Fund, Gavi, one of the United Kingdom's great success stories. It's vaccinated from deadly diseases over 1 billion children under 5. It presents real value for money to British taxpayers, and over 80% of our constituents support it. Will he give the House today an undertaking that Britain will continue this leadership and make a decisive pledge at next month's replenishment conference?
Well, I'm grateful that this is a really important issue. As he rightly points out, I've long supported it and will continue to support and share details with him just as soon as I can. But it is important, have supported it, will continue to do so. Thank you.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions.